the kind of what you call the Manusmriti system that was there before the Constitution of India came to existence, before the democratic constitution that was drafted by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar came to existence in the 1950s, early 1950. So before that, it was the rule of a casteist regime called the Manusmriti. Manusmriti, or the what you call the Hindu law. We have plenty of translations of the Manusmriti today. We have from early translations of the Indologists like Max Muller to George Bahala, to women critical writers like Donija. We have plenty of translations of the Manusmriti available today. So all these translations into English language show that it was a kind of casteist law. It was a biased and anti-people law. It was privileging the elites, the cultural and political elites, the traditional advantaged groups of India, especially the priestly classes and the patriarchal forces in India. So, unfortunately, India is also a land of traditional culture where patriarchy and paternalism and priestocracy were having a kind of undue leverage over the ages. So, at least for the last 2000 years, since Manusmriti came to existence after the fall of the great Mauryan Buddhist empire led by Ashoka, the last Buddhist emperor, according to researchers and critics like Dr. Ambedkar, for example, the last Mauryan emperor, Brihadratha, was assassinated by his own militia man, his own army man called Pushyamitra Sunga, and that was the beginning of the Manusmriti. In order to legitimize that killing done by a Brahmin, that Brahmin militia man killed his Mauryan Buddhist emperor through cheat, by stabbing from behind through naked cheat and violence. And in order to legitimize that killing done by a Brahmin, this Hindu law was codified. This Brahmanical law, which is called Manusmriti, was codified in India. So, at least from that time of the killing of Brihadratha by Pushyamitra Sunga, or the establishment of the Sunga regime dynasty in India, Manusmriti has been the constitution of all the princely states in India. Even in Travancore and Kochi, which is called the Dharmarajya, even in Travancore, Manusmriti was reigning supreme in early 20th century. So only with 1950s Constitution of India, the modern democratic constitution came into existence, a rule of law, an egalitarian, modern, democratic, civilized kind of legal system, a governmental system was established in India. So, fortunately, we had more than 50 years, now almost 70 years of constitutional democracy in India. And we were boasting about ourselves as the largest democracy in the whole world, which is even a model for the West and the European or American kind of regimes. But unfortunately, all those exaggerations, all that pride has gone into vain, and we are facing severe constitutional democratic kind of dilemmas and intense kind of crisis in the present. So this is the context in which we are talking about the real democracy of the people, the real democratic dimensions of the thoughts from the soil of our own country, from where Baba Saheb, he digged out the foundation, the foundational values of modern democracy, liberty, equality, and fraternity in India. So, according to Ambedkar, who was the chief architect and the chairman of the drafting committee of our constitution, it is from the Buddha and his Sanghas that he developed these basic modern democratic values, the values of liberty, equality, and fraternity. It is not just from his European or American education. It is not just from the West that he has blindly copied and pasted the modern democratic values, especially liberty, equality, and fraternity, not just from the French Revolution paradigm, not just from the Magna Carta of the Britain, the parliamentary system of Britain, and the constitutional kind of system and legislature in Britain, not just from the system of democracy in America, where he had his first research degree. He was educated in Columbia, one of the leading centers of higher education during early 20th century, even today. So he had all those exposures. He went abroad, he went to the West, he studied in the West. He had multiple research degrees from various universities in the West, both from Europe and America. And he has also he came back and he has also identified the roots of democracy, the roots of this ethical and egalitarian form of governance and state system, the statecraft of the people, the egalitarian form of government or governance through representation, through participation, through the active involvement and voicing and agency, or grounding the voice and agency of the people. That is what democracy is all about. That we have seen. There is no democracy without social representation or the real inclusion or involvement of the vast majority of people. So he has also digged up that tradition of active participation and inclusion and equality that was there in India too. And that is why he said that I am taking these modern democratic values of liberty, equality, and fraternity from the Buddha, who lived 2,600 years ago, and the democratic orders the democratic sects or orders or groups that he inaugurated in the form of his sangha. We know about the triple gem of the Buddha, that is Buddham, Dhammam, and Sangham. Buddha means enlightenment, enlightenment through dedication and education and meditation, and the Dhammam, that means the ethics, the rules of law that is necessary, vital for the sustenance of the whole world, not just for the human. It is not just the ethical or legal contract between man or man and woman, or the people in this country or elsewhere, but it is also the just principles of ethics that are required for the sustenance of the whole planet and the whole cosmos and the whole living beings and non-living beings. So that kind of universal ethics, which is required for the sustenance of life in this planet and the sustenance of this cosmos itself, or this greater universe at large. So that kind of greater common good and ethical principles are called the Dharma by the Buddha. So he was keenly studying. Baba Sahib, after he came back to India, he was keenly studying the ethical principles that were rooted in the soil of India and Asia in particular. The light of Asia, the Asian Enlightenment tradition that was centered or initiated by the Buddha, and also partly by the Tirthankaras and other Charvaka philosophers of this country. So that was studied, and also the Semitic traditions, the Christian tradition, the Islamic tradition, the Sikh tradition, the Parsi tradition, and plenty of other traditions. Dr. Ambedkar has studied, because I am elaborating about his epistemological kind of endeavors, because he has given birth to, or he has paved the foundation of this Dalit thought and Dalit writing in India. So that is why I'm trying to sketch the background or the socio-cultural and historical evolution of this democratic thought, which has transformed India, which has given India its constitution, which has given India its social democracy and representation kind of governance. This from at least 70 years of democratic rule. This is the foundation that is stated by Ambedkar himself. So, according to Ambedkar, it is in the Vinaya Pitaka and the Vinaya rules of the Buddha that you find the foundational principles of inclusion and egalitarianism. There it is, everything is written down and codified, and all the motions of the parliament, how to introduce a motion, how to pass a motion, how to go for voting, and how to go by the majority decision, and all those details, even all those details of inclusion and expression and legislation, all those things are written down in the Tipitaka called Vinaya Pitaka. The three Tipitaka means the three baskets of Buddhism. So in the Vinaya Sutta and Abhidhamma Pitaka, especially in the Vinaya Pitaka, you have all these parliamentary politics and parliamentarian conventions and practices being elaborated by for the Sangha, for the benefit of his bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, his nuns and monks, by the Buddha himself. So that is the foundation of democracy in India. So it is not just from the Western model. Of course, we are, as Baba Sahib, we must be open to the West and the whole world, because we are all citizens of the world. We are not narrow nationalists. You were already discussing into jingoistic and ultra forms of nationalism, the cultural form of nationalism, linguistic nationalism, and cultural nationalism in the country growing into this kind of totalitarian kind of regimes and unfortunate situations of intolerance and violence in the country. So we need to go beyond that narrow parochialism, as Tagore has given us the insight. We need to go before that narrow parochial walls of of exclusion and limitations, and we need to see the whole world. We are citizens of the world, especially the English students and researchers in particular. We are into that global arena, though we need to critique the processes of globalization, and we need to critique the neoliberal policies that have created a lot of trouble, especially the resurgence of the late capitalist kind of economy and global market economy and privatization that has again further worsened the condition in India, along with this communalization of India. Corporate Brahmanism has emerged. The late capitalism and new Brahmanism have cooperated to create the greatest havoc in India in the history of the independent India. So this kind of traditions, alternative traditions, this kind of liberative traditions, these kind of democratic traditions are there at the background or at the base of our constitution and the rule of law in India and the modern democratic state in India. And it is the cultural and political revolution of the downtrodden, of the most disenfranchised people of India, the most excluded people of India, who were even outside the purview of human status in India, who were considered as even untouchable and unseeable people of India. They have created the democratic shift in India. They have provided us with a constitution of India that has sustained almost 70 years now. So that is the point that I am making. The Indian democratic revolution, the Indian Republican Revolution, the Indian constitutional kind of rule and governance, it was initiated, it was conceived, it was identified, it was developed and enhanced and manifested and created and sustained by the people of India, especially the most downtrodden, the most excluded people of India, the so-called untouchables of India, who were not even recognized as human beings and who were casted away as animals. The condition of the people in Maharashtra or even in Kerala in early 20th century, 19th century, when colonialism came, when modernity of Europe reached us, when missionary intervention reached us, it was severe than that of the animals in India. That is why what Poigai Lapachan, a great voice of Dalit voice from Kerala, Poigai Lapachan or Kumara Gurudevan, Sri Kumara Gurudevan or Poigai Yohanan or Poigai Lapachan. He had 18 names like that of the Buddha. So he was singing about that kind of extreme exclusion and extreme impoverishment. There was nobody to. No, not a letter is seen. I don't see even a letter of the alphabet. No, not a single letter is seen. So many alphabets are seen on so many races. There was nobody to write down the history of my race. It is the unfortunate case that Poigil Appachan was lamenting in no alphabet in sight in Susitaru and Satyanarayana. You have it as the title, the lamentation, the cultural wailing of Poigil Appachan. So this was the condition. Even in early 20th century, when Poigil Appachan was writing, this was the condition, and this was transformed through the rewriting of the law, through the rewriting or redefining of the political system, of the system of state through the constitution, the democratic constitution that was brought in by Baba Saheb Ambedkar after his great endeavors in the West in his education, and after his return, he began with human rights struggles for the basic freedom of touching water or using the public roads or going to the public offices. So he began with all those things and he burned the Manusmriti. In the 1920s, when he began those agitations for the people to touch water, the agitations, the public collective struggles at Mahad and Chowda, he also burned the Manusmriti, and he imagined a new democratic future for India. And Dalit's thoughts began with Ambedkar in modern times. And of course, Ambedkar was not out of the blue. He was having his predecessors. He was acknowledging the Buddha, Kabir, and Phule as his gurus. So this tradition of anti-caste thinking, this tradition of anti-caste writing has its origin in the Buddha. In an unprecedented way, 2,600 years, it was the Buddha or Gautama, Buddha, the Gautama, the enlightened one, and the compassionate one. The compassionate one was the first to critique this inhuman system of aristocracy and exclusion in India, untouchability and marginality in India. And it was the Buddha who actually began, as I have mentioned in the beginning, invoking Baba Saheb, that it was the Buddha who began the practice of democracy by including the untouchable, by including women, by including Shudra and other non-elite or non-Brahman sections of the society into his Sangha. He himself was from the non-Brahman kind of section, and he knew the pangs and pains of being excluded, a social ostracism and exclusion he knew, and he tried to include the most disprivileged people, the most downtrodden people, the so-called Chandala or the Avarna and the Shudra and women into his Sangha, and he made all those people, even the untouchable woman. We know about Chandala Bhikshuvi. Tagore's plays there, Chandaliga is there, and even before that in Kerala Renaissance, Narayana Guru's disciple Kumaranashan has written that narrative poem, which is called Chandala Bhikshugi, where you have the untouchable woman becoming a nun in the Sangha, or the democratic sect of the Buddha, as an equal person of religious or ethical life and spiritual life, and she becomes a great missionary, and she even converses with Prasenajit, the king of the land, the ruler of the particular country. So that kind of inclusion, egalitarianism, it was started by the Buddha in the beginning. So that is why Ambedkar acknowledges the Buddha. Then the Sufi, after Buddhism was defeated by priestly patriarchy or Brahmanism in India, it survived its ethical kind of messages and ideas, liberative ideas survived in disguise in many sects, as in Sufism, which is a combination of Islamic tradition as well as the Indian traditions of the soil. So in Sufism, for example, we have writers who wrote in the 15th century, like Kabir Das, in the Dohas of Kabir, in the songs and writings of Kabir, and in the life practice of Kabir, as in the life practice of the Buddha. He was for inclusion, participation, and representation of the unrepresented. Democracy was at the core of Buddha's teaching, his Anityavada, his philosophy, as well as his social practice of the Sangha, which included the untouchables and women. Likewise, Kabir was also practicing the kind of amalgamation, the kind of cultural hybridity, the kind of mixing up of all humans. And that is why he has inaugurated that liberative stream of the Kabir kind of, though through bhakti, though in the disguise of bhakti, he was attacking and critiquing the mullah rule of Islam, as well as the Brahmanical priestocracy of the Hindu kind of dominant religion, or Brahmanism or Hinduism as such. So in Kabir, you have the liberative dimensions, and in modern times, of course, Ambedkar considers Mahatma Phule, Jyotiba Phule, or Jyotirao Govindarao Phule, the 19th century intellectual from Maharashtra, who actually pioneered the education of the untouchables and Dalit girls and the Shudra women in particular in Maharashtra. So in 19th century, in early and mid 19th century, it was Jyotiba Phule who pioneered the educational reform, the social renaissance. He is considered as the pioneer of social renaissance in Western India, in particular, in early 19th century, like Ayya Vaikunthar of Nanjinad in Kerala. The Samatwa Samaj of Ayya Vaikunthar was established in 1836. The Satishodhak Samaj of Mahatma Phule was established in 1875, though it was established late in 19th century. In 75, he began his reforms, his educational endeavors in the 1840s itself. So it was Phule, Mahatma Phule, Jyotiba Phule, who pioneered the social revolution so that Ambedkar could continue. So these greater examples who educated Phule, who educated his own wife, and Savitribai Phule. Savitribai became the first modern English teacher of India in modern times. And also they cooperated with that Mr. and Mrs. Sheikh, Sahira Sheikh and Salman Sheikh, who provided them with the school building. And he was also one of the earliest critics. Phule was one of the earliest critiques against this dominant form of nationalism, the Brahmanical nationalism that was emerging in India in late 19th century. That boomed in eastern part of India, especially in the Bengal Renaissance, in the imaginations of Bankim Chandra, Vivekananda and Aurobindo, the other rising form of nationalism, which has come to this cultural nationalism. The foundations of cultural nationalism we will find in Bengal Renaissance, in Bankim Chandra, in Ananda Math, in the Bande Madaram kind of nationalism. Mahatma Phule was critiquing all these forms of dominant Brahmanical form of Hindu nationalism in late 19th century itself. So these are the trajectories of Ambedkar and the modern democratic revolution in India, which is enshrined in the book by Gail Ometh, which is meant for your study. I was just providing a historical, socio-cultural background of the democratic process and the democratic nation emerging in India, and this is the legacy. This democratic legacy of Dalit thought and writing are being textualized by Gail Ometh, an American-born woman who was educated in America, who came to India in her youth, and who did her research about this anti-Brahmanical kind of democratic movements in India, especially on the Phule movement, the Ambedkarite movement, the Dalit democratic revolution that has changed the modern India, and also about the Dalit philosophy, Dalit visions. What is the philosophy of critique that is being foregrounded? The philosophy of critique and the philosophy of reconstruction that is being the democratic deconstruction as well as reconstruction that is provided by Dalit thought and writings towards recreation of India in a more egalitarian, in a more democratic and a more peaceful and solemn way. So that is the importance of the work by Professor Dr. Gail Ometh. As we know, she has written plenty of works, more than 15 works about India. That is her contribution. She has come down. She has settled down in India. She came to Maharashtra in the 1960s itself, and she married a man from Maharashtra, Bharat Patanka. Unfortunately, all these social revolutionaries and scholars are in threat now after the assassination of people like Dabolkar or Pansare and Kalburgi, and even women like, you know, uh, uh, even women like Gauri. So many people are being now assassinated, and Mr. Patanka, the husband of Gail Ombat himself, is in the blacklist of the fascist, pro-fascist groups in India. The unfortunate situation, the alarming situation in India. Whoever critiques this cultural nationalism, whoever voices their dissent against this form of anti-democratic formations and developments in India, who raises questions about intolerance and atrocities in India, as something that happened in the Hathras incident or the other Yuna episode or the Jajar killing or the Kirvenmani massacre, and and plenty of such atrocities and human rights violation, naked violence and aggression and intolerance are booming in every part of the country, not just in North India. Even in Kerala, incidents of atrocities are growing. We have the caste killings of Kevin Joseph. We have the brutal lynching of Madhu the Adivasis. We know all those details. We don't have time to go into that. So anyway, Gail Ometh has provided us a detailed account of this emergence of or resurgence of fascism in anti-democratic kind of violent form of identity in which is based on the dominant religion, which is based on a particular language of that particular religion, which considers it as the religion of the gods, or the religion, the bhasha, or the language of the god. That particular centrist or centering of that particular dominant ideology and discourse in India, this has created something called the Hindu consolidation of India, at least from early modern age. In 19th century, with the encounter with British colonialism, this kind of what you called retrogressive or regressive form of revivalism, which was growing in India. I have invoked the issue of Bengal Renaissance, Bankim Chandra, Aurobindo, and Vivekananda, that legacy that created another rising nationalism. And in Western India, also in the context of Maharashtra, also the Peshwa regime, we have the Bhima Koregaon incident and its problems and all those controversies now. So at least from the Peshwa Raj in Western India, it was Brahmanism in the making, and you have the Indian identity created as a Hindu identity in the dominant discourses in various parts of India, whether it is Maharashtra, whether it is Bengal or Odisha or even in South India. This was booming. So she analyzes this construction of Hinduism, the construction of Hinduism as Brahmanism, and she challenges the popular notion of Hinduism as the essence of India, or Brahmanism as the essence of Hinduism. And she talks about the untouchable millions in India who are even outside the imagination of the Hindu nation, the what you call the Varnashrama Dharma regime. The Varnashrama Dharma regime, or the Chaturvarnya system that is enshrined in the Rig Veda, in the Purusha Sukta of the Rig Veda, it disenfranchised the majority of people in India. There is no place for women, and there is no place for the Shudra, and there is no place for the Atishudra. These are terms from Mahatma Phule, Shudra and Atishudra. Dalit was also used by Mahatma Phule. Dalit and Path Dalit. These terms were also popularized by Phule for the first time. Ambedkar also used it in Marathi, but he was mostly speaking and writing in English language. Therefore, he couldn't use it much. We find the word untouchable. Who are the untouchables? How they became so? Who are the Shudras? How they became the fourth Varna of the Indo-Aryan society? These are the masterpieces of Ambedkar. And also his last work is incomplete. That is the real magnum opus, which is called Buddha and his Dharma, the panacea for challenging this dominant form of cultural nationalism. So anyway, I was talking about the critique that is raised by Gail Ombet, the Western woman, the Anglo-American woman who came to India and wrote about all these things in English language. According to her, the vast majority of people are outside the Hindu fold. They are not exactly Hindus. They are called the Dalit Bahujans, not just the Dalits, but Dalit Bahujan. Bahujan is a keyword again used by Mahatma Phule and also by the Buddha himself. So, like the word Dalit, Bahujan is also having a long history. So, all the people who are outside the human status in India in the Chaturvarnya system, the Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra system. These are the fourfold Varnas. The system is called Chaturvarna or Chaturvarnya or the Varnashrama Dharma system, which excludes women of all castes and Varnas, which excludes the untouchables or the Avarna. The people outside, the Avarna are outside. The vast majority of people who are having the Buddhist lineage and legacy, they are outside as untouchables. So they are called the Avarna. So the Dalits and the OBCs, the SCs, the STs, the scheduled tribes of India, the ancient Adivasis of India, the scheduled castes or the Dalits of India, the OBCs or the other backward classes of India who are considered as Avarna, who are not included in the fourfold Varna, they were all outsiders. And even within the Chaturvarnya fold, you have the Shudra as the Antyaja or the Padaja, and therefore they are denied educational rights and human rights. They are not given proper education. Even Manusmriti, not just the Purusha Sukta, but the Manusmriti and the Gita sanctioned it as Chaturvarnya Maya system, Guna Karma Vibhagacha, which is an absurd theory according to social reformers, contemporaries of Phule, like Narayana Guru in Kerala. who mocked it by saying that is it some trees sprouting into leaves that these Chaturvarnis are emerging, getting born out of the body organs of through the mouth came the Brahmins, through the thighs came the Vaishya, through the hands the Kshatriya, and through the feet the Shudra. So they are the Padaja or the Andhyaja, and they must be subservient to all these Trivarnikas. This is called the TTB system, the twice born system, the metaphysics of the twice born, according to Gopal Guru, another great scholar of political science and Dalit studies, in particular in India, after Ambedkar himself. He questioned it. Gopal Guru, who has written works like Humiliation. So, along with the work of scholars like Gail Ombat, we also need to look into the work of Gopal Guru, one of the preeminent political science scholars who is now editing the EPW, who was a professor of politics at JNU. So he calls it the TTB, how egalitarian are the social sciences in India. Humiliations, claims and context. He cooperated with Sundar Sarukai to write that book on theory, Dalit theory and Ambedkarism, which is called a cracked mirror, the Indian debate on experience and theory. So along with the works of Gail Ombet, like Dalit Visions, the anti-caste movement and the construction of Hinduism, or the identity, Indian identity, a consolidated Indian identity, and Dalit and democratic vision, the struggles of Dr. Ambedkar, Buddhism in India, challenging Brahmanism and caste, uh, towards Begambura, a concept of a kind of imagination of the Dalit poet, the medieval Dalit poet, Bhakti poet Ravi Das or Rai Das. Begambura, a city without any violence and a city of equality, a city without any taxes and other cuts. That is what Begambura is all about. So she has that book, and she has translated, even today she's translating so many untouchable saints and writers from early writers, 14th century, 15th century writers like Chockamela, with then Tukoba or Tukaram, and Namdev and Tukaram and Chockamela, all these untouchable saints or Shudra writers and singers are being translated by Gail Ombet into English language. So she has plenty of works. She has also written about the women's movement. We shall smash this prison, women's struggles in India. She has also written about gender issues, gender and technology, the Asian experience. She has written about the peasant movement. We have the Kisan March now. So the peasant movements, she has written about the peasantry, especially the Shudra peasantry and the Dalit peasantry, the Dalit Bahujan peasantry in Maharashtra, about the politics of women, about Dalit empowerment and the struggles of Ambedkar and Phule and all those early untouchable saints from Chockamela onwards. So in Gail Ombet, in Gopal Guru, and in Kancha Ilaiah, Shepherd, we have the glimpses of the democratic revolution and the democratic philosophy of India, the philosophy that began with the Buddha. So Buddha's theory of inclusion, Buddha's theory of Anityavada, or Buddha's theory of dependent origination, which is called Paditya Samutpada, that provided the what you call the epistemological ground for these new Dalit Bahujan kind of articulations and thoughts and politics to develop. And in this particular work, which is called Dalit Visions she elaborates about the construction of the Indian identity, how this Hinduism, the construction of Hinduism, how it is created on Brahmanism, and how Brahmanism in the Vedic discourse, the metaphysical and obscurantist discourse of the Veda, how it has imagined a kind of elitist regime or a structural society of inequality, which was again represented or elaborated as graded inequality by Ambedkar, and how how modern leaders like Phule to Ambedkar and others, how they have fought against this, how they have come up with new alternatives, new democratic alternatives to this notion of the Chaturvarnya society or the Varnashrama Dharma regime in India. So she has a chapter on the construction of Hinduism, its structural elements, its underpinnings, its Smriti Shruti Puranas, its practice of what you call the Brahman supremacism or Brahmanism. Everything is explained there. And she has the first opponent to this system in modern times, that is Mahatma Phule, Jyotiba Phule, that is Brahmanism, Hinduism as Brahmanism, as Brahmin exploitation. That is a chapter in which she talks about the critique that was raised by Phule against through his works like Gulamgiri or slavery. He was denied education like Chatambi Swamigal in Kerala in the Gurukula system of Sanskritic education. So he went naturally to the British, to the Scottish missionaries. He got educated in English, and he wrote it in English. He wrote about the casteist system of India, the slavery, the Gulamgiri that he is referring to is nothing but caste slavery of India. So he wrote it and he dedicated it to the African Americans, the struggling blacks of America, when it was that abolition of slavery and the Civil War in America. So during that time, in the 1860s, he wrote it and he dedicated his first work in English, that is Slavery, Gulamgiri, about the caste slavery of India. It became a huge hit in Britain, and it was even discussed and mentioned in the British Parliament. And in America, of course, they were having many discussions and debates on Gulamgiri or slavery, which was dedicated to the African Americans, the blacks of America. So Harlem Renaissance, it has not just inspired Phule, but it has also inspired Ambedkar. You have it when Ambedkar was studying in Columbia, which is a downtown in New York. The suburb was called Harlem, and Harlem was in the making. Harlem was in the beginning. So naturally, Ambedkar was inspired definitely by the struggles, the cultural and artistic revolution of the black people in America. So anyway, Mahatma Phule has it. So in that chapter, Brahmanism or Hinduism as Brahmanical exploitation, Brahmanical regime, Gail Ombeth has elaborated it all about Phule's Satyashodak Samaj and his Sarvajanik Satyadharma Pustak, the book of universal truth and the society for the verification of truth. He began that Satyashodak Samaj. He was into women's education, and he educated his own women, Savitribai Phule and others, and that legacy was continued. And in the next chapter, Gail Ombeth, she talks about Brahmanism as patriarchy, and she cites the examples of women like women who are into Mahatma Phule movement, women like Pandita Ramabai and Tarabai Shinde and others. So Pandita Ramabai and Tarabai Shinde, they were educated in that movement that was led by Phule and Savitribai, and they became very serious scholars, eminent scholars who, as we have the example of Chandala Bhikshuki or Manimekhalai in Chatana's epic in South India, who can go to the other world, to various parts of the world, who can travel and speak to the multitudes and leading scholars of the world, who can converse with even kings and ministers. So that kind of women who could go to Europe and who could get into dialogue and debates with the leading scholars of Europe and the West. So that kind of women were produced through the legacy of Phule Savitribai and Salman Sheikh and Sahira Sheikh. So in the chapter about Brahmanism as patriarchy, Tarabai Shinde and Pandita Ramabai, and that has even produced recent scholars, modern scholars, contemporary scholars, that legacy of Phule and Savitribai to Tarabai Shinde, Pandita Ramabai. We have that scholar, Professor Sharmila Rage, who passed away recently, who was at Pune Women's University, which is named after Savitribai Kranti Jyoti Savitribai Phule Women's University, Pune. She was a professor. Ambed was also a professor there. She is a professor, an honorary professor. She is having many chairs and professorship from various universities. She is a visiting scholar and fellow and professor all over the world. Gail Ambed. I cannot. We don't have much time to elaborate about all these details. So anyway, I was talking about the kind of women's education and liberation that was initiated by Phule, Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, like the Vittoba of Pandarpur, Jyotiba. Is a different kind of, it's a Dalit Bahujan god. The name, very name, it's not exactly Jyotirao, though he was officially given that Sanskritic Jyotirao Govinda Rao Phule. Later he was called affectionately by the people as Jyotiba or Jyotiba Phule. So that the revolution that he pioneered, it has created many thousands and thousands of women, educated women, women teachers and missionaries and global scholars who could rewrite and challenge the history of Brahmanism and patriarchy in India. They have all challenged. That is what Sharmila Rage has written in her last work, which is called Against the Madness of Manu. B.R. Ambedkar on Brahmanical Patriarchy, which is an edited and compiled volume of Ambedkar, specifically on Brahmanism as patriarchy. That is what Sharmila Rage's latest work is all about, Against the Madness of Manu. So that is the recent example. In other chapters, Professor Gail Ahmed, she talks about Ambedkar himself. Ambedkar seeing Hinduism as a counter-revolution. Ambedkar was defining the importance of religion and philosophy, and he was attacking the religion that was paganism and that became a constant threat to liberty, equality, and fraternity in India. And we need to annihilate the religion of caste, and only India will be liberated. That was the well thought, well studied, learned, enlightened kind of opinion of Ambedkar regarding India. To deliver India, that is what he struggled hard to enshrine into our constitution, which is now dismantled day by the forces of Hindutva and fascism in India. So anyway, Ambedkar imagined Hinduism as a counter-revolution. If Buddhism is the revolution, is the real revolution, is the real change, is the subversive form of egalitarian democratic form of thing, it is Brahmanism which is the counter-revolution to it. So revolution and counter-revolution. The history of India is seen as a struggle between Brahmanism and Buddhism. How Buddhism was a real democratic revolution, which included untouchables and women into the fold, and which imagined an egalitarian, enlightened, and compassionate, not just passionate, but a compassionate and ethical way of living. It is Brahmanism who imagined a violent and exclusionary regime in a very passionate way. So it is much beyond what you call this counter-revolution and passion of Brahmanism, which is compassion and ethics and maitri and muditva, which are the values of Dalit literature, Dalit thought, the Mahakaruna, the Mahamaitri, the Maha-upekha, and the Mahapragya of the Buddha. These are the important aspects and values. In that sense, Buddhist literature or Dalit Bahujan cultural revolution is the revolution of compassion, revolution of Maitri, revolution of, it is a democratic kind of revolution, egalitarian transformation into what you called a peaceful and compassionate kind of ethics. So we have Ambedkar himself critiquing Hinduism as a counter revolution, and he also defining this caste system as a graded inequality. It is not out of the blue. It is a creation of a what you call obscurantist, paganistic kind of structure, the patriarchal, aristocratic religion, or the paganism of India, that is Brahmanism. And it is nothing but an exclusion of the vast majority of people. It's a denial of basic human rights and educational rights, and it is a graded form of inequality. And it is the worst kind of power structure or hierarchy in the whole world. So that is why even we don't have examples to cite. We don't have comparisons. Only in the Gramscian notion of cultural hegemony, we have something similar to in the context of Italian fascism, the plight of the peasantry or the disenfranchised people, the subaltern of the notion of the subaltern and the notion of the hegemony of Antonio Gramsci, you have something near it. So we have certain very close similarities between the thoughts of Ambedkar and Antonio Gramsci, who were even contemporaries. While Ambedkar was reading at Columbia, and after that in the Temple in London, and later in the British Museum and Library, Antonio Gramsci was already imprisoned by Benito Mussolini. When Ambedkar was in action and he was into writing of annihilation of castes in India, annihilation of castes. Who are the untouchables? Who are the Shudras? What Gandhi and the Congress have done to the untouchables, and Buddha and his Dharma. These are some of the most important works of Ambedkar, which each student of literature and culture and social sciences, humanities, all the students of humanities, and even science students in India must read and study these things. But unfortunately, these things are not in our syllabus. Even Narayana Guru's Jati Nirnayam and Jati Lakshanam, which can maybe compared to annihilation of caste of Ambedkar, even those things are not into our university syllabus. Unfortunate situations are there. We don't have much time to talk about all these omissions and evasions of history and reality in India. But anyway, Ambedkar has defined it as the what you call the graded inequality that has created the conundrum in India, and Hinduism is nothing but a paganism of counter-revolution. It is the discourse against liberty, equality, and fraternity. If Buddhism is the real democratic revolution of India, Brahmanism or Hinduism is the counter-revolution. That is what he has defined. And also, she comes to Gail Ahmed, she comes to South India, and she addresses the issue of the Tamil kind of resurgence and the Periyar self-respect movement. E. Ramaswamy Naika, Tandai Periyar, or Periyar, as in English and in common parlance it is used. So Periyar and his critique of Hinduism, his critique of Hinduism as the North Indian hegemony or the so-called Aryan debate, the Aryan kind of hegemony or dominance or Delhi rule, Hindustani Delhi, that kind of a discourse which Gail Ahmed identifies in the formation of fascism or the Hindutva uprising in India. Again, it was initially pointed out and critiqued by the self-respect movement E.V. Ramaswamy Periyar and his claims for the Dravida Sthan, or the Dravidian land of South India, and the importance of Tamil as against the imposing of Hindi or Sanskrit, which is nothing to do with South India, which has nothing to do with South India. So that kind of resurgence and rebellion of South India in the form of Periyar's self-respect movement and his critique of Hinduism as Delhi rule or North Indian kind of repression against the largely Bahujan Buddhist and Christian or Islamic traditions of South India. That is being elaborated in that chapter on Hinduism as Delhi rule, the Delhi Hindi, Hindu, Hindustani discourse that is being critiqued. And in the other chapter, she has the early 1920s, early 20th century radicals of the Dalit radicals of Maharashtra himself, talking about Hinduism as a paganism, as a most degraded form of feudalism. The critique of Dalit Panthers in the 1970s, early 1970s, the Dalit Panther movement was initiated by Namdev Dhasal and Raja Thale and Arun Kamble, and then it was extended, that Dalit poetic tradition after Ambedkar in the 1970s. Ambedkar, unfortunately, he passed away just 2 months after his conversion, his great conversion in 1956, October 14, Vijayadashmi, Ashoka Vijayadashmi, the conversion day of Emperor Ashoka. Ashoka the Great, and also the conversion day of B.R. Ambedkar, the architect of Indian Constitution. It was October 14. We have just celebrated, remembered that anniversary, October 14, Ashoka Vijayadashmi, recently in this month. After Ashoka, it was Ambedkar who revived Buddhism along with 6 lakh followers at Nagpur in 1956. In October 14th, his conversion was there. So anyway, those traditions of Marathi Dalit writers, Marathi poets from the underground like Namdev Dhasal and Daya Pawar. Daya Pawar writing poetry about Harlem, New York itself. He has written a poem called New York, which is actually a love poem to his own wife. And Prajna Daya Pawar. She is also an eminent writer and poet of her own stature. And we have Dalit poets and autobiographers and fiction authors like Babu Rao Bagul in the 1960s. They began Babu Rao Bagul, Lakshman Mane, Lakshman Gaikwad, and all these. We have even women poets like Hira Bansode, Prajna Daya Pawar, Urmila Pawar. Women poets are also, even in Kerala, we have Dalit women poetry coming up in the Dalit literary discourse. In the Dalit literary tradition, we have women poets and tribal poets. Now, plenty of tribal poets are there into action in Dalit writing, which has become the most vibrant, the most dynamic, and the most democratic, and the most egalitarian, diverse kind of an idiom and a new kind of genre in the making, which has just begun. Even in the last 20 or 30 years, or in the last 50 years or 60 years after Ambedkar, so to say, this has become a great what you call literary flourish, and it's flourishing in various languages. That is another democratic diversity and dynamism of this Dalit writing, is that it is booming in many languages of the country. In all the modern Indian languages, it is booming, even in Kashmiri. That is the most striking feature. Even in Kashmiri, not just in Tamil or Malayalam or Kannada or Bangla or Odia or Hindi or Marathi, where it began in modern times. It is having an ancient lineage, as I told you. It is there in the vocabulary of Ambedkar, in the usages of Phule, Even before Phule, in the 1831 modern English and Marathi dictionary compiled by J. Molesworth, the word Dalit is there. And even before that, it is there in all the what you call modern Indian languages like Marathi or Hindi, and also in the classical language called Sanskrit. It is there. It means broken or crushed or fragmented, as Gamgee talks about the history of the subaltern is fragmented, and the subaltern cannot enter history. He talks about the dilemma of the subaltern, and also he dreamed about the subaltern coming into hegemony. So that is there in Sanskrit as well as in the Prakrit roots. Much beyond in the Prakrit roots in Pali, it is there. It is now the new research shows that it is used in the Vinaya Pitaka itself, in the Vinaya Pitaka or the Tipitaka of the word of the Buddha. It is there in the Vinaya Pitaka in the Vagga called Chula Vagga. The word Dalit is used to talk about the victims of caste and Varna. The outcasts of Brahmanism, they are referred to with the term Dalit in the Chula Vagga of the Vinaya Pitaka of the Tipitaka. That is the recent research. So this is one of the most vibrant and most ancient, as anti-caste literature. It has its origin in the women's writing tradition of the Therigatha. Again, during the time it began during the time of the Buddha, as Susi Tharu and others, K. Lalita and others have pointed out in their women writing in India. The Therigatha, or the songs and spirituals of the elder nuns, that is the foundation of women's writing in India. And that's also another example of Dalit writing in India as anti-caste literature, anti-patriarchal literature, anti-Brahminical literature. So it is having an ancient legacy as well as counter-hegemonic writing and counter-hegemonic philosophy or thought, which has created the Indian democratic revolution as it is enshrined in our constitution by B.R. Ambedkar himself. And this is the most vibrant genre today, which is only in the making. It is only evolving, and it has already spread into various corners and various modern contemporary living languages of India. That shows the depth and also the severity of the problem, the immensity of the issue, and the importance, the epistemological gravity of the critique that is there at the heart of the Dalit discourse, Dalit literary, as well as cultural and political articulations, and also the philosophical critique of elitism or cultural elitism or cultural exclusivism or graded inequality in the country. So with these initial remarks, since we also need to, I am here to listen to you and to learn from you. I thank the organizers, Dr. Anjana and the department, and all the teachers, Dr. Srija and all the other teachers in the department, and the students and the patient listeners, the researchers and all the listeners. And let us have a kind of conversation and dialogue and discussions regarding this new development in philosophy as well as in writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Dear participants, please unmute yourself and you can speak. Or you can put your question in the WhatsApp group. This is discussion time. You can unmute yourself and speak.
Good evening, participants. Kindly ask questions. May I ask you a question, sir? I'm Anjana. May I ask you a question?
Please, please, madam, please.
Is the Buddhist strain in in the Dalit writing, is it still very visible in the modern times at present?
Yes, of course. As I pointed out about even when the women study scholars like Susit Tharu and Kelilida, they were digging up the ancient forms of women's articulation. They had to identify Terigatha or the songs of the Theravada Sanghas, or the women, the nuns in the Theravada Sanghas. They are called the Teris. So like that, if you come to even in Kerala, if you look at the poetry of Kerala, Dalit poetry of Kerala, in writers like M.B. Manoj, for example, you have many Buddhist themes and motifs uh, and articulations there. Even in women's poetry, if you look at Hira Bansode in Maharashtra, Hira Bansode or Urmila Pawar, they have written about the what you call the life and teachings of the Buddha, and also they have written about Yashodhara and Rahula and all those relatives of the Buddha in a very engaged way, in a very intimate and loving kind of way. So it is there, as in the writings of Baba Sahib. I have mentioned his main or magnum opus, that is the Buddha and his Dharma. So at least from that time onwards, at least from Baba Sahib's time, in South India, it is much beyond that. If you look at the first Neo-Buddhism in South India, it was initiated by Pandit Ayodhi Thasar in Tamilagam, and he began in the 1880s. So he was writing something called Indirar Desa Saritram, or the Buddhist history of South India. That is what Indirar Desa Saritram, which was written by a Dalit scholar who was what you call multilingual scholar. He was a scholar of Tamil, English, and Pali at the same time. So we have that tradition of Pali. We have that tradition even in, if you look at Kerala Renaissance, you will find after Pandit Ayodhyadasan, it was in Kerala that the neo-Buddhist kind of cultural movement was there, led by the students of Narayana Guru like Midavadi, Sahodaran, and Mulur, and C.V. Kunjaraman. So Mulur has directly translated Buddha's Dhammapada into Malayalam directly from Pali by learning Pali. So that Pali tradition was there. Even today, 20% of words in Kerala, in Malayalam, in Kerala Bhasha or Malayalam, it is directly from Pali. We have Amma or Appan or Achan or Ayyan. All these words are directly from drawn from Pali. So that tradition of Pali, it was there from ancient times onwards, at least from Ashokan times, and even in contemporary, modern, and even postmodern poetry and other articulations. You have that S. Joseph, poet S. Joseph in Kerala. He is going to write about the Buddha. He's composing a series of verses on the Buddha. So that kind of a lasting imprint. That kind of we have the other examples in Sahodaran's poetry, in the Baujan poetry of Kerala. Sahodaran has written a Buddha Kanda. It is in the poetry of Sahodaran, which was first published in 1934 in book form. We find a Buddha Ganda where 8 of the poems are directly about the Buddha and the Buddhist tradition of Kerala. Even in Ashan, who is supposed to be a Mahagavi and a fairly what you call celebrated kind of a poet, you have Sri Buddha Charidam. Edwin Arnold Sri Buddha Charidam is there, and Chandala Bhikshuki is there, Karuna is there. So at least 3-4 long compositions of Ashan are about the Buddhist themes and Buddhist messages of Karuna and Maitri and Ahimsa. So that legacy is still continuing in modern and postmodern literary streams. even in Kerala and outside it is very much it is there. Even in what you call the English writing that is directly coming up in various parts of India. Suraj Yengde, for example, caste matters. He is into theory. He is one of the global figures. Unfortunately, some of the figures like Teltumble and others, they are in prison now.
Yes,
At any time,
yes.
those who make the descent, they can get into that prison house. Now, an 83-year-old missionary who was working among the Adivasis, Father Stan Swami, is also now into that grip. So, because of the unfortunate developments in the country, we don't have much spaces and platforms to discuss about this kind of democratic legacies. That is the unfortunate situation today. Thank you.
What about Balendran Chulikat's conversion to Buddhism a few years back? Does it have anything to do with it, or was it due to some other cause? But
Yes, he was also, as Kamla Suraya, he was also exercising the freedom of
okay.
religion that is there as a fundamental democratic right in our constitution. So both Kamla Suraya and Balachandran, they have practiced it. They have practiced what they have preached. And in the poetry of Sachidanandan, in Balachandran, in Vinaychandran, in all the poetry of modernism, literary high modernism in Kerala, in Malayalam, we have the image of the Buddha. In A. Ayyappan's poetry, we have direct rendering of the Buddha, Buddhanu Atungutim, and so many things. So many from Itasheri onwards, you have that tradition of in poetry. Buddha is a key image. Anupama Kripanidhi, in from Ashan onwards, from the neoclassical romantic age onwards, you have that Buddha as the sun. In the short story of C.A. Pen, you have it. In a short story like Smaragam or the Memorial, you have the people coming with the youngsters are coming with carrying a sun on their shoulders, and the sun is, of course, in Marathi poetry and even in Malayalam poetry. As I mentioned in Karuna, you have Anupama Kripanidhi Akhila Bandhavan Shakya Jinamuni. The sun is compared to Shakyamuni, the Buddha. And in the short fiction of C.A. Pen, which is written in towards the end of the 20th or early 21st century, you have the same image of the sun as the image of the Buddha and the Neo Buddha. Neo Buddha is, of course, Ambedkar. So the sun represents both the Buddha as well as the Neo Buddha. So it's everywhere. So if you probe in detail in both contemporary short fiction and fiction and in the poetry of Dalit writers, it is everywhere, not just in the Dalit writers, in the Baujan writers as well as in the mainstream writing tradition. It is everywhere. But we are not providing adequate hermeneutics. That is the space of interpretation that is lacking in the present that I mentioned. Thank you.
So, what about Northeast? Do you have Dalit writing there, the northeastern part of India? As you mentioned, many
Yes,
regions.
yes, definitely. In Kashmir, it is there. In Northeast, it is mostly Adivasi writing. Tribal writing is there. So, tribal writing, they have their own histories and their own cosmologies. So, it is entirely different. But in Chakma tribes and in many other tribes in the Northeast, you have a direct legacy of Buddhism coming up. So, you may not find many Ambedkarist kind of democratic modern values discussed there, but they are trying to articulate their tribal heritage. They are trying to textualize the alternative forms of history or heterologies or local kind of traditions there. The folk and local traditions, the alternative cosmologies that can challenge the hegemonic Hinduistic kind of or the Shaiva Vaishnava kind of imaginary or meta-referential structure. You have alternative structures in the tribal writing. So in the Northeast, you have mostly the tribal or Adivasi kind of articulations now, which is of course part of the Dalit Bahujan kind of collective and resistance kind of speech.
Oh, thank you.
Ajay, can I ask you a question?
I have
Please.
A question. Ajay,
Uh,
you're talking about Baba Sahib Ambedkar uh, trying to eliminate the caste system. He had also written a book called Annihilation of Caste. But
yes.
you find that later on he was trying for separate electorates for the Dalits. Now, isn't that a bit contradictory? This was something that he had an Gandhi.
Not
He actually
exactly. Not yes. Not exactly. It is based on the principle of inclusion. So without initial representation, you cannot have an adequate entry into the system of governance. So that is why a different seat or a particular constituency, different seats must be reserved. That is what affirmative action is all about. It is to ensure representation and not to deny it. So you should have a definite or a very particular affirmative kind of program to ensure that representation. That is why reserved constituencies were demanded. It was given. It was already given by Ramsay MacDonald, the British Prime Minister. But unfortunately, Gandhiji went on a hunger strike till death. That is the first time that he declared a hunger strike till death uh, uh, against the separate electorates of the or the reservations of the untouchables in India. The historically disadvantaged people, the historically excluded or marginalized people, they need their rightful shares, and that must be ensured within the system or the structure. So that is what the separate constituency is all about. So that is what women are also doing. They need the 33% women's reservation. According to population, they are more than 50% of India. They are 50 or 51 or 52% of India's population. So they must be actually they must be given at least 50%, but we have limitations for that. So they are demanding 33%. That is not even materialized even today. That is not one actually. So likewise, a particular share according to the population, a particular share, each community, each social section must get their rightful share according to, at least according to, proportionate to the population. So that is what the reservation of seats was all about. It is a practice of freedom. It is a practice of social representation and inclusion. Without ensuring this social inclusion, there is no democracy at all. So that is what that is why Baba Saheb demanded that, but he has to actually dilute his position, because Gandhi went for this. He was for a kind of moral hijacking of Ambedkar's consciousness with making this what you call the hunger by declaring it as a hunger strike till death. He was trying to manipulate the things. So that is why he submitted to that demand of Gandhi. That is what the infamous Pune Pact, the 1932 Pune Pact, is all about.
Excuse me, sir. Can I also ask
Please,
you a question? Sir,
please.
I'm a research scholar at Wales University, Chennai, and I'm doing my research on Dalit literature. I've taken the works of Bama and Shivakami.
Okay.
I would like to know what theories I can apply to these novels.
Okay, very good. So I appreciate you for selecting these texts on Bama and P. Shivkami, who are major Dalit writers in the country today. They have written about the autobiographical experiences, autobiographical kind of fiction. They have written plenty of novels, and autobiographical element is predominant. So you may use theories related to women's writing, subaltern writing, and Dalit feminism in particular. You will have to read Sharmila Rage. That is why I mentioned about the great women's literary tradition, starting with Sahira Sheikh and Savitri Bai Phule and Tarabai Shinde, Pandita Ramabai, culminating in what you call the Sharmila Rage's own work. So that work that I mentioned by Professor Sharmila Rage, professor of sociology at Pune University, against the madness of Manu. B.R. Ambedkar on Brahmanical patriarchy is a very important source book for you. And also the critical term Brahmanical patriarchy is popularized by the other major historian of India, feminist historian Uma Chakravarti. She has written the work called Brahmanical Patriarchy, which is an essay, which is a serious essay that was published in DPW. So Uma Chakravarti, Sharmila Rage, then you have Anupama Rao, one of the most contemporary and youngest kind of women's studies scholar of Dalit feminism. Anupama Rao's Caste and Gender is there. We have in South India V. Geeta and S.V. Rajadurai, their works are there. We have Rajeshwari Sundararajan writing about that. So plenty of women's studies scholars, feminists, and Dalit feminists like Abhinay Ramesh, Anupama Rao, and Sharmila Rage. Others are there. So these could be of great use to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Okay. Anjana ma'am?
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
There are no more questions. We'll
no more.
find. Are there any more questions? If there are any more questions, kindly ask. Yes. Any doubts, clarifications? Anybody? Yes. No. Okay, in that case, shall we wind up?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, as a part of formality, let me propose a vote of thanks to Dr. Ajay Sekher on behalf of the Department of English and all my colleagues and the participants assembled here. I express our heartfelt gratitude to you, sir, on sharing your thoughts. And all of us felt that your talk was very different from the other talks because the commitment was there. You are very passionate about what you speak, and so that was easily communicated through your words, and the depth of your knowledge, the vastness uh, of knowledge, all these things were conveyed, and we are very grateful to you for having accepted our invitation at such a short notice, and having come here and delivered a detailed explanation of the concepts, various concepts of Dalit writing. So I thank you once again. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Great time and discussion with you. I thank Dr. Anjana and Dr. Srija and all the other members of the faculty and the listeners, the students, and I wish them all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. A word more. Friends, today we are coming to an end of the second session of our webinar series. So if you want to convey something, if you want to say something, please come forward and say. Please unmute your mic and speak something if you wish to.
Ajay sir, do you mind sharing? Do you have any objections to us sharing your mobile number or anything if the participants ask in order to to, if you want to share
Okay.
some.
Oh, sure, sure. You are free to
If
share my
anyone asks, I
email
mean,
as well as
there.
mobile. Please do.
Yes.
Please
Okay.
do. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay.
So shall I leave now?
Okay,
Shall
sir.
I leave now? Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you
Thank
very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Participants, if you want to address, you're free to. Um,
If you have any feedback, any suggestions,
Yes.
anything, any opinion, anything to express. I hope all of them have seen the feedback form.
Yes. So I wish to thank all the participants here for their presence, and I wish to thank our head of the department, Dr. Anjana Shankar, for organizing such a wonderful webinar. And we look forward for more webinars like this. I hope it really did benefit you, and I would like to extend my gratitude to Srimati Sridevi, uh, Sneha Jacob, and Swati MP for the technical support that they have provided. Thank you so much.